It's the summer of 2008. The world economy is in freefall. Investment banks are collapsing, money is drying up, and Silicon Valley is starting to panic. Inside a tiny office in California, a group of engineers and dreamers sit around a table. They're building something that they believe in, a digital memory for the world, a tool to capture thoughts, ideas, and scraps of life across every device. But there's one small hiccup. They're out of money. Not metaphorically, literally. Payroll is 3 weeks away. An investor has just pulled out. Pretty soon there will be nothing left in the bank. Zip, zilch, nada. And then, in the middle of their despair, an email arrives. From Sweden. From a user who loves their app. His message? How can I help? That single message and the wire transfer that followed would change the course of Evernote forever. Welcome to Story of the Thing, a weekly podcast that dives into the true stories of the things that fill our lives. My name is Christopher Sandoval. I'm a product marketing and developer relations expert, and today, I'm your host. Today's story: how a single user saved Evernote from total collapse. The year is 1950. The Cold War is just beginning, and the television is slowly creeping into living rooms across America, just in time for the Korean War to break out. Amid this turbulent backdrop and a small corner of the Soviet Union, Stepan Pachakov is born to Alexander Stepanovich Pachakov and Ekaterina Pankova. Like many of this era, Stepan was born in a time of great change. The old order in Europe and Asia had collapsed following World War II, and the world at large would quickly see the introduction of computers and microchips that would innovate beyond their wildest dreams. After some time in the Vartashin district of Azerbaijan, Stepan's family moved to Mahashkala in the Republic of Dagestan. From the beginning, he showed a sharp mind, especially for numbers. In school, while other kids struggled through arithmetic, Stepan was already playing with the patterns behind the equations. As he grew older, his path was clear: mathematics and science. He earned a place at Moscow State University, the intellectual powerhouse of the USSR, where he studied mathematics in the 1970s. There, he immersed himself in one of the hottest areas of computer science at the time: fuzzy logic and pattern recognition. Now, fuzzy logic might sound abstract, but here's the basic idea. Instead of seeing the world in rigid yes or no categories, fuzzy logic tries to deal with uncertainty. You know, with the gray areas, close enough matches. And for Stepan, this wasn't just theory. It was the beginning of a lifelong obsession, teaching machines to understand the way humans write, think, and remember. After his studies, Stepan worked at the Academy of Sciences. But he wasn't just a researcher. He was a teacher and an organizer, building communities of mathematicians and technologists who wanted to explore how humans and computers can meet halfway. By the 1980s, this work led him into entrepreneurship. He co-founded a company called Paragraph International, a company focused on handwriting recognition. His team built systems like Calligrapher, which could take messy human pen strokes and turn them into readable text. They even contributed technology to Apple's ill-fated Newton, one of the first handheld computers that tried, and mostly failed, to make pen computing mainstream. From the very beginning, Stepan Pachakov's life was about one big idea: that human memory and machine memory didn't have to be separate, that technology could act as an extension of ourselves. And that idea would eventually lead him to create something that we would all come to know: Evernote. Let's fast forward back to June 2008. Evernote 3.0 launches its public beta. This was a big shift. Instead of some little quirky Windows app, Evernote was becoming a cloud platform. You could save a note on your computer, snap a photo on your phone, clip a web page in your browser, and it all synced up seamlessly across devices. It was magical. Remember, this was before iCloud, before Google Drive became mainstream. Syncing just worked, and that alone felt futuristic. The press was excited. TechCrunch called it one of the hottest new startups of the year. Early adopters were buzzing, and Evernote quickly gathered a small but passionate base of users who swore that it was changing the way they organized their lives. But while the product was soaring, the company's bank account was sinking. Behind the scenes, Evernote and the company was in trouble. The 2008 financial crisis had detonated the venture capital market. Investors were spooked. Deals were falling apart. You have to remember that the 2008 collapse had happened less than a decade after the dot-com boom. And at the time, the collapse was seen as institutional. There were serious talks about how or even if the economy could be salvaged. And Evernote, they had about 3 weeks of cash left, if that. The relatively new CEO brought in to make Evernote a household name, Phil Libin, decided to do the responsible thing. He decided that they were going to quietly spin down, use the rest of their money to make payroll, and then fully close the doors. Servers would go dark. Employees would scatter. The dream of a second brain for everyone was gone. Here's how Phil tells the story. One night, he gets an email from a user in Sweden. The message starts with simple praise. I love Evernote. This app has changed the way that I work. The good vibes were needed. The company was collapsing and the walls were closing in. At least somebody liked the product. At least somebody would remember Evernote when the company ultimately collapsed. But then comes the kicker. Inside the body of the email, a simple question. I'd like to help. Could I invest? Libin thought it was a prank. Startups don't get rescued by random fans across the globe. That's just not how the Valley works. That's especially not how it worked in 2008. Nobody had money, and if they did, they certainly weren't going to give it to Evernote. But the man was serious. He asked how much money the company needed. Phil told him the truth. We're about to die. We need $500,000 just to survive. A pause. Silence on the other end. This was a prank. Wait. No way. No way. Within days, a wire transfer of $500,000 landed in Evernote's account. And that money kept the lights on. It paid the engineers. It kept the servers humming. It gave the team just enough runway to close their next round of funding when the market finally stabilized. Phil later called it a miracle, a lifeline, proof that Evernote wasn't just software. It was something that people cared about so deeply that they'd invest their own personal money to keep it from dying. And in that moment, Evernote's mythology was sealed. The little productivity app that could, saved by a fan. With that lifeline secured, Evernote didn't just survive. It exploded. By 2010, they'd raised an additional $20 million in venture capital. By 2011, they had over 11 million users. In 2012, they'd raised another 70 million, and by 2014, Evernote had officially crossed the 100 million user milestone. And it wasn't just individuals who loved Evernote. They had rolled out Evernote Business, convincing companies to run their entire knowledge management systems on the platform. They had also snapped up popular apps like Sketch for annotation and Penultimate for digital handwriting. Suddenly, Evernote was more than just a note app. It was an ecosystem. Users called it their second brain. Journalists praised it as one of the most indispensable apps of the decade. The green elephant logo became iconic in tech circles. And through it all, Phil kept repeating the story of the Swedish fan investor. It became part of Evernote's brand lore, a reminder of why they existed, because users believed in them. But a meteoric rise has a long shadow. As Evernote grew, so did its ambitions. In 2013, they launched the Evernote Market, selling branded notebooks, scanners, even socks. The company lost focus. Instead of perfecting the core app, they spread themselves thin. By 2015, the cracks were showing. Users complained about bugs and slow performance. New features felt gimmicky. And then came the business realities. Layoffs, a controversial pricing change in 2016, data security issues. Evernote was struggling. Phil stepped down as CEO, and new leadership came in, promising to clean house and refocus. But the magic, at least at that moment, was fading. From 2016 to 2020, Evernote went through what you might call the identity crisis years. They rebooted the app, especially on mobile, and they trimmed side projects. Slowly, Evernote found its footing again, but it wasn't really the darling of Silicon Valley anymore. In 2022, the story took another big turn. Evernote was acquired by Bending Spoons, a Milan-based software company. Bending Spoons promised to modernize Evernote's infrastructure and keep the product alive for the long haul, but the transition was rocky. Layoffs, higher prices, and a much stricter free tier frustrated longtime users. But Bending Spoons insisted that it was all in service of making Evernote fast, reliable, and sustainable. And this is a story that's still going. In 2025, we find Evernote alive. Millions still use it daily. The green elephant still remembers everything. And although there have been significant issues, both for the company and for its users, it does seem like, at least for now, the spirit of that Swedish user is still alive in the hearts of so many. So what do we make of this story? In a world where startups often live and die by venture capital, Evernote stands out for one reason. It was literally saved by love. A user believed in the product so much, he wired $500,000 to strangers halfway across the world. That doesn't happen unless a product has created genuine emotional connection. Evernote wasn't just convenient, it mattered. And it mattered enough to rescue. And that's the lesson here. Technology comes and goes. Apps rise and fall. But when you build something that truly resonates, something that becomes part of people's daily lives, you create more than customers. You create believers. And sometimes, believers save you. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend. Maybe someone who remembers Evernote's glory days. And for the audience, I'd love to know, what product in your life would you save if it were about to disappear? Because somewhere out there, a startup might be 3 weeks from the end, waiting for a fan to hit send on an email that changes everything. And you may never know until you find out the story of the thing.